Welcome to the Orthodox Ethos. Today, we're joined by a good friend and co-stroller in the work of building up the church, Father John Valadez. And we're going to be talking to you about the realm of occult, magic, and other phenomenon in our day, the UFO phenomenon, from the Orthodox patristic perspective. Thanks for joining us, Father John. It's a joy to have you on Orthodox Ethos.
Thank you for having me, Father. Your blessing. We've been needing to do this for some time, and it's wonderful to finally done.
Yes, yeah. It's a joy always. It's a joy and to see you, but also to work together with you for the building up of the church. We've been following your work for years, both in your lectures, but also the very unique and I think it's wonderful outreach that you do in the among the young and the youth and the various subcultures through the Death to the World zine. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about that before we get into the topic of today's discussion.
Sure. Yeah. Death to the World was started in the 90s by some of the brothers at St. Herman of Alaska Monastery. And it's really what helped me come to the church later. They had stopped doing the zines and these magazines in the late 90s, and they were an outreach to punk rockers and metalheads and people in the music scene. And I later came in contact with them when I was learning about Orthodoxy with Father Turbo, who you've had on here before. And they really saved my life. They pulled me out of that punk rock mentality and the punk rock scene and brought me into the church, because I was really seeking truth, and they gave me truth. But after we were baptized,
I was going to say, is this phrase "death to the world"? That's a unique phrase? I mean, it's from Saint Isaac the Syrian, I think. But was that used partially to kind of pierce the armor of this nihilistic subculture and like get people's attention? And was that probably something that got your attention?
Absolutely, because in the punk scene, if you were to hand anything to anybody that had anything remotely like about Jesus or Christianity, if there's something in the title that even smelt of anything religious, it would be rejected right away, right? But this Death to the World with these bearded, robed guys holding skulls, things like that, it drew you in. And the text of it was patristic and lives of desert dwellers and sayings from the fathers and Father Seraphim's life and his writings, things like that. And it really drew me in. It really drew me in by its title and by everything in it, because I was already a Christian by that time, actually, but I was looking for an otherworldly Christianity, a Christianity that was radical and different and ascetical. I just didn't know what asceticism meant, I guess, at that time. But actually reading about it, about these desert dwellers and things, just blew my mind. Absolutely blew my mind. So,
so it was an escape from this world, but not from the real world. So punk rock gave you an escape from this world, not really any landing page.
No landing page at all. No landing page at all. So, punk rock promotes, like, as you said, that nihilistic attitude that there is no future at all. So live fast, die young, do what you want. And unfortunately that drags so many of those youth that are enticed to it, are enticed by it, down into depression and suicide and drugs and alcoholism. And I saw a lot of that around me in that subculture. So, the tagline for Death to the World is the last true rebellion, because it's a rebellion. You start to realize that it's a rebellion against yourself. and that's how you put off the world, is to rebel against the passions, to fight off our sins and embrace truth, who's Christ, who's a person, not an idea or a philosophy or something, as Father Seraphim put it so beautifully. So
it's the last true rebellion against the tyranny of self.
Yes.
Selfishness and self-love, which is a prison. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's awesome. And so has that also in that outreach, and sure you yourself having come from some of that, but also running into people who are reading the zine. Hopefully there are a lot of people who are finding Orthodoxy through your efforts. You've also encountered some of these subcultures, which are, which I understand from others, there's an explosion of the occult and magic. I mean, it's popularized through books like Harry Potter and so many movies and all the rest. So this is something that maybe we can just define it first, describe it, and then we can talk about the spiritual, like put it in this context historically between the alpha and the omega of history. And then we can talk about maybe the pastoral, how to deal with it. And because it's so important for the church to go into the darkness and bring the light of Christ and to bring people out of that darkness. I mean, this is at the core of what the church does on all the different levels. So maybe you can help us just starting out by saying, what are we talking about? What is the, I guess it's the general title would be the occult for somebody who's just totally ignorant of any of this. Like, where do we start?
Yeah, there's an enticement to the occult, and I think that it has to do with a lot of various factors in our very spiritually sick society. But one of them, one predominant reason is because wherever there is a spiritual vacuum made, it seems like, and Father Seraphim talks about this in his survival course, that whenever there's a spiritual vacuum created in society by various political movements or something, or social movements, a lot of the times it gets filled, especially in when we're talking about modern times, gets filled with a type of interest in experience of this, some kind of spiritual experience that just relies basically on the senses, and the human reason is kind of subjugated, if you will, to this fascination with things that appear or miracles that happen, things like that. And that's why you had these explosions of the gurus in Eastern cults and tarot card reading and things like that. Even in very recent years, I think at least, especially for the past decade, there's been lots of articles and news articles about the rise of Wiccan and other tarot card reading, palm reading, things like that especially younger people are becoming entranced with.
So is this the outgrowth of something like the theosophy? Early 19th century, turn toward Eastern mysticism and universalism, and now we're at New Age. And what is I'm trying to get a sense of the big picture, and then the parts of the various pictures. You've got the philosophical end, but then you've got the kind of the occult end, the like really satanic stuff. You've got the New Age kind of Eastern religious. Is that all within that umbrella that we would call the occult? I guess, I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. And Father Seraphim links those movements together with modern movements and even with UFO phenomena. So it is all bound up in this same spirit of the world moving towards embracing Antichrist.
And the ultimate, is there a common denominator that we can say that kind of animates all this whole spectrum of spiritual movements? Is there a common denominator would it be a rejection of something, or would it be more an affirmation of the self, or both? Is there anything we can define what we're talking about?
I think that it's both, but there's definitely disproportionate power of the senses, right? Wanting to running after experience. There's an attachment to surface appearances of things as well. All this goes in. All this, of course, goes with the rejection of a personal God, right? And kind of having an impersonal deity or impersonal sort of spirits running around that people think can become subjected to them or help them, by various things. But there's also kind of this.
Yeah, maybe one way to think of it is. Say again. Sorry, Father.
I said there's also, this idea of like the universe works with me as well, right? Through tarot card reading or manifesting destiny, things like this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Kind of a pantheism. Is a pantheism at work? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the reason why it can become so enticing and maybe it can become so addictive is that there is no guarding of the senses that is taught anymore, right? The ascetical practice has fallen out of favor in the West. And especially, it has through centuries in the West, but especially after Vatican II, right? We have this total demolishing of any kind of ascetic ideals within the church. And so there's no the concept of prelates that the Russian fathers talk about, and Father Seraphim so much talks about when relating things to our culture. There is no way for modern man to really guard against these spirits. What is good and what is bad. It's all kind of on the same playing field.
This reminds me of from the life of Father Seraphim. In one section toward the end, he's corresponding with somebody who was enamored with perennialism, and in particular Guénon. And he says, they've touched on some really important things in terms of just tradition and rejecting a lot of this modernity. And they have a word that helps people make sense of the modernity and the contemporary, post-industrial world, et cetera, et cetera. But he says, what is missing and what's impossible for them to find is the discernment of spirits. And the discernment of spirits only exists in the church among the saints. That's the gift. So, you've when you think of all these different movements, and there's no absolute, there's no guide rail, like canon. The canons literally mean like a measuring stick, right? So they cannot make sense of the origins and the natures of these spiritual movements that they're enamored with. They don't have the guide of the Holy Spirit. They cannot discern the spirits. And so you have this embracing of, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, which is very,
I
think maybe even the majority of people consider themselves today in America not religious, but spiritual. That seems to be almost an immediate result of the centuries of the pendulum swing from one extreme to another in the West that just dizzied, the Ivan Kirievsky talks about this dizzying philosophical, and to the point where people lose, they don't believe in truth anymore because they've been essentially for century after century, there's been no royal path in the West. There's been no balance.
Right.
And so after all of these centuries, now we're coming to the end of the road, and there's no way for people to discern the spirits, and they become just victims of the spirits, the demons.
Yes, and the abandonment of of receiving revelation from God through the ascetical life and watchfulness over the senses and purification and things like that had happened in the West puts this overemphasis on the senses and perceiving God with just the logical mind, things like this that began to happen. We're seeing the outcome of it with the obsession with occult practices. And it's like Father Seraphim has that famous quote that we're in Orthodox and the Religion of the Future, where he basically says, like, there's never been an era where demons have appeared so openly and extensively, as we're experiencing and seeing today. But I think, Saint Justin Pavlovich in that, what is that essay? The knowledge of God, according to Saint Isaac of Syria, or something like that, where he discusses the need for the purification of man to happen so that he may be able to see and perceive the world around him clearly, and a sick mind is always going to produce a not such a clear picture of what in truth and in reality is happening around him. And it's so true. It's so true. What is going on today, because there is no guarding of the senses. There's actually an emphasis on the senses. Once what gratifies your senses is actually an identification now of who you are. Right? I have this sexual preference. It's who I am. I do this, and this is who I am. Right? And I think this has been taught in school for a long time, in public school for a long time, but it's definitely part of the whole spirit of worship of oneself and not knowing how to really perceive the world around them in a real way. And I think this is why Father Seraphim also had people read Charles Dickens and things like this when they first became Orthodox, because our perception of what it is to be a human being is so incredibly flawed, and it has become so sick, So,
and if it was bad in the 70s, before the explosion of smartphones, what are we talking about today? I often say in my classes on Revelation, we're following El Tanaz Perennial's 5-volume. And, you're talking in the 80s. And I just many times I'll say, this is 1982 Greece. And what would he say today in 2023 America? I mean, the exponential disintegration of the society, the exponential growth in delusion and heresy, the spirit of Antichrist. I mean, the signs are everywhere. And yet, I mean, they see it as a seed, and they spot it. And so we have from Father Seraphim, Elder Athanasius, others from the 70s, 80s, whatever. We have all we need, right? But it just would be fascinating to hear them actually analyze today how much more clearly what they said has become the standard, the norm.
Yes.
And hopefully these voices we can, pass on to our contemporaries to get them freed from all this delusion. I mean, that's what we're trying to do with Orthodox Ethos continually, is to reach out to all the spectrum of heterodoxy, whether we're talking about, classical Western Christian heterodoxy, or whether we're talking about extreme heretical group sectarians and all the rest, to try to pierce their theological fusion darkness, and bring them out of that into orthodoxy. And that sounds like what's the same mission of That's the World in that's culture that you've been working with.
Yeah. Is to pierce into that culture and hook people, and fish them out of it,
Yes. Yes, exactly. Do you feel like, do you see something in particular? I mean, should we talk about UFOs as a phenomenon that seems like it's been strangely reborn in the last 3 or 4 years? Have you noticed this, where you see more and more mainstream media, even Tucker Carlson talking about it, or, you have, I think, Matt Walsh, who believes that I think he came out even and said, he says, they're real. We have UFOs. And then there's, I think, the other fellow there on Daily Wire, what's his name? The conservative guy says, no, this is all nonsense. This is demons. So even among traditional Latin Catholics, I call papal Protestants, they're not sure what's going on. So it seems like there's an explosion of that recently.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think it really follows the pattern that Father Seraphim lays out too, because you had a period in the mid 20th century that was so heavily where the rationalistic or the scientific approach to life was so pushed, right? It was so heavy, scientific advances in technology and men going to the moon, these types of things. And it left this spiritual vacuum, which was filled by Eastern gurus and UFO sightings and things like this. And now we have, after COVID and the trust the science era, we have this explosion. Literally that year, it was like 4 or 5 months after these lockdowns and things like that, where videos and pictures started to get supposedly leaked, from government sources about finding UFOs or pictures of UFOs and these sorts of things. And ever since then, it's climbed up this ladder where it's just in the mainstream news and media, and even people who, I'm still friends with some people I was friends with in my punk rock days and stuff like that on Facebook and stuff. And they were really into it. This raid Area 51 movement that happened during that COVID year. And, everybody wants to be locked up in their homes, but at the same time, and social distance and wear masks, but at the same time, they want to storm Area 51 to, uncover the supposed aliens that are there. It's such a bizarre thing, and it seems so absolutely, the contrast seems so big between this trust the science and then the occult experiences. But I had friends that I were with a long time ago. I saw them on social media and stuff falling into this trap where trust the science, get vaccinated, wear your mask, social distance, but at the same time, make sure you do your tarot readings during the morning and collecting crystals and these kinds of things. It's really interesting how it all panned out. But Father Seraphim was definitely right about it.
So what did Father Seraphim say? Let's say specifically. He said that UFOs are nothing more than demonic activity, correct?
That's right. That's right.
And do you see, I don't even see beyond a few exceptions, maybe the Michael Knowles, I think it was the one I was thinking of. Maybe I think he said something like this. But other than that, it's rare to hear that message today, isn't it? Most people either believe that there's extraterrestrials or just think it's nonsense. But there doesn't seem to be the discernment of spirits is there for most people to say, wait a minute, this is actually demonic activity. And to understand in that way, because I mean for the vast majority of people, they've convinced the demons have convinced people that they don't exist. The devil doesn't exist. This is the mythology. It's a mythology created by Christians or something.
Yeah, and it marries itself really well. These deceptions marry themselves really well with the way that our culture is going with different technological advances and looking out into space and all these kinds of things. And I mean, even there was a exorcist who was very close to John Paul, the Pope, and that they beatified or something. I forget. But anyways, he was an exorcist, and his name was Balducci, and he even he even accepted the idea that there could be extraterrestrial life out there. And Father Spiridon Bailey actually put together a book called UFO Deception, and he has a whole chapter on the Vatican and things that were coming out of the Vatican, of the accepting of these alien life forms. And Francis, even at the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, talked about how God created sovereign beings, and they could be other places in the universe, and that they would, if they visited Earth, they could be welcomed into the Roman Catholic Church, and these kinds of just crazy, absurd things. But when one looks at the actual experiences that people actually have with these UFO sightings, they're very, very similar to demonic experiences that we see in the lives of saints. And Father Seraphim talks about that with the life of Saint Nilus of Sora and Saint Martin of Tours and others in Orthodoxy and Religion of the Future. But, there are these categories. I think there's about 6 categories of UFO encounters, one from just like seeing lights in the sky all the way to abductions, and the higher number that you get. So 1 is like just seeing lights in the sky, and then 6 is that they have these abducted experiences where they're on a ship or something like that. They think, and there's these beings over them, et cetera, et cetera. And but they're all very demonic experiences. And the higher, even secular medical doctors who would examine these people and psychologists who would interview these people would say that the higher that a person gets on this scale of encounter, like the closer that they are to the actual encounter of these supposed extraterrestrial beings, the more that there is psychological damage, emotional damage, suicide rates skyrocket, drug and alcohol use skyrocket, these kinds of things that are obvious signs of not some benevolent, more advanced being, but it is definitely a demon, and Father Sarah,
one of the main,
he's kind of joked that, why are these supposed advanced beings always crashing on planet Earth and and things like this.
Nobody asked that question.
Yeah, why are they breaking time around here? Yeah.
Yeah. They come and go for like hundreds of years, apparently, whatever, even thousands, but they just never seem to say hello to, like, in broad daylight or whatever. I mean, it's always got to be very hidden and deceptive. But so one of the things that obviously is missing, let's just talk about Western Christians and those Orthodox who are not paying attention. If you go to the lives of the saints, as you were saying, we were just talking about this a couple of days ago, there was an ascetic on Athos that was mentioned in the series on Revelation, where he was a hermit and he had fallen into kind of a hidden pride, and the demons came in the form of a synod from Constantinople, and they said, we need to make you the patriarch and the best, you're the greatest, you're the wonder, and he followed them all the way down to the pier and was about to step into what he thought was the boat, and then he made it out of the cross before traveling, and everything just disappeared, and he says, oh my gosh, that was a complete demonic deception. So you read the lives of the saints, it's all over the place, right? It's all over the place. You have ascetics who were deceived by demons. You have ascetics who thought they were, the Seraphim talks about that as well in the Orthodox future. So just reading the lives of the saints, you're going to put 2 and 2 together here. So this is really instructive for us. How can we prevent? So this is happening around us. People are falling into deception. How can we as Orthodox Christians make sure we don't fall into deception, follow after? Because in the days of Antichrist, we know there's going to be tremendous propaganda for his, divinity, and he's going to be making, many miracles will be committed or be made by the Antichrist to convince the masses that he is, a divine being that needs to be worshipped, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
So besides, I mean, so the lives of the saints daily, right? That's number one.
Absolutely. And even before that, I would say, the real number one is to have a spiritual father that can help you to
Yeah.
discern things, and be part of the church life on a regular basis, not just on Sundays, but to live the calendar and to hear the hymn and to hear, that goes all into reading the lives of the saints. But there's I think that our compass as far as being able to rightly discern things is so incredibly broken when we come to the church that we need a discerning spiritual father to be able to point us in the right direction a lot of the time. And because even the lives of the saints, I've seen people take them so out of context at certain periods because there's this.
Like the Protestant scriptures, you can do the same thing to the lives of the saints.
Absolutely. And so it's so paramount to have a discerning spiritual father to be able to push you into the right direction, so that you're also not becoming a deluded person yourself.
So that's kind of a given in the Orthodox Church, but unfortunately in the Western world, I encounter many people who say, I don't have a spiritual father. And when you inquire more deeply, there's a variety of practical obstacles that they're facing.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So there's, it's that, I mean, distance, but there's also not that many spiritual fathers that they would, feel, I don't know how to put it, but there's not a lot of experienced spiritual fathers in a lot of places today. So there's also that that they're going to have to travel. They're going to have to do something to get to somebody. They're going to say, okay, this person has a lot of experience under his belt. But in any case, it is a given as an Orthodox Christian that you have a spiritual father. I think it's non-negotiable.
Non-negotiable. Yeah. No, it's good, because like I said, we're so broken, but being immersed in the spiritual literature of the church and things like that is so incredibly important as well. This UFO stuff actually was when I was a kid, I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified of aliens, terrified. But I watched a lot of shows. I watched a lot of shows about alien encounters and interviews with people that were into it and all this kind of stuff. Go. I was so terrified. I remember my job. One of my chores at the house was to take out the trash once a week and down to the curb for the trash man to come. And I would even be terrified at nighttime, walking by myself, out. I didn't want to even have curtains open on a window. Maybe I can see, maybe somebody an alien walk by or something like this. So terrified of it. And it wasn't until I came to the church and I read Orthodox Religion in the Future that I started to have courage, because now it's the sign of the cross, it's going to confession. It's spending my life in the church, and it doesn't have power over me anymore. And that was so incredibly freeing to read this stuff by Father Seraphim and stuff later by other people who would talk about the same similar things, because it gives the rise of the saints give us solutions and freedoms from the terror of death and the terror that the demons bring into our life and subject us to it and things like that, so
that's because what you're pointing to implicitly is the demonic methodology, and that they use fear to control and to manipulate, and that's the main tool in their arsenal, correct?
Yeah, and in these stages of encounters, as you see, there's these kind of far away encounters with the lights in the air, And then as encounters get closer to an actual, what people perceive as an abduction, there will be things like tapping on windows where nobody's there, things being left behind or taken and nobody's there. It's just like the fear starts to increase, and some of these people, when they talk, there's popular shows on Netflix right now and things that are series of talking about close encounters, UFO encounters, things like this. And people would say, at these highest stages of encounters, they'd scream for people, but they couldn't. No voice would come out of their mouth. They're totally captive to these beings, and that's what I was terrified of as a kid. Like, I couldn't call out for my mom or my dad or my brother or whatever if these beings like take me. So yeah, the fear absolutely was something that was overwhelming when I was younger, for sure.
And so the main way we dispel the fear of the enemy is, how would you describe it?
To get rid of the fear?
Yeah, how do you overcome that fear? I mean, it's part of it's the ignorance of knowing Christ and knowing the method of Christ. So big step would be, as you said, coming to the truth and understanding what's going on here. Just alone is super reassuring. Like, you put it all in context, you realize this is actually this. And then, of course, calling on Christ, sign on the cross, and all the rest, which is in the arsenal of the church. But all of that, if it's not utilized, then you can, even Orthodox Christians, persist in a kind of debilitating fear and anxiety. You saw that during COVID, right? COVID, mainly the fear of sickness and death is what drove the masses to do whatever they did. I mean, decisions were made under duress to do, to get this or that wonder drug, whatever they thought they were going to need to protect themselves. So they're driven by fear. If that's taken away, it's a huge weapon of the enemy that's just made, it's neutralized, and you live a different life. Anxiety. If you live knowing that you're in the hands of God, the providence of God guides your every step, and it says in Scripture, the hair of your head will not be. Nothing happens without the knowledge and the providence of God. And not only do you not manipulate, you don't have anxiety, and anxiety is the heart of so many sicknesses today.
Absolutely. And by personal experience, with that UFO stuff and other things in my life, it's what it boils down to is a lack of faith in that Christ is the ruler of all things, and I think that was the thing with the whole alien thing that freaked me out. Is like, I have no power over these beings. But when I came to the church and you recognize who Christ is, and now these things are neutralized, in that we have power through him and we call upon him, and everything that would befall us is ultimately for our own salvation, as far as we're talking about like sicknesses and illnesses and things like that. And so I think we have a problem in modern society in giving over our life completely to Christ's hands and trusting that he will take care of us for our own salvation.
It's kind of ironic because we have all these gadgets that we trust implicitly. The government oftentimes is entrusted, the media. I mean, there's so many things that we live our daily life on a lot of trust. Like, we get in the car, we trust that we're not going to have an accident. There's a lot of trust going on, but there, I guess it's because, I don't know, the heart of the trust that we're giving is something that's tangible? Maybe is that is that why we're so what is it that makes us so trusting of things that have been created by man, but God?
I think Father Seraphim nails it when he was talking about Eastern gurus and Eastern religions, is that they're impersonal. All of those things are impersonal, and so they require nothing of you, really, right? But when we encounter Christ, who is a person, there's a demand now, because God is a personal God, and not just what we want to make God up as, you know? And so, yeah, it lays a responsibility now.
So all those impersonal gadgets and everything, one of the reasons why we like to trust them is because they're all feeding our egotism.
Yeah.
There's nothing demanded of us. It's only given to feed our egotism. So there's a sense of security in our egotism. Like we're secure in our own, self. Our own autonomy is not undermined. Whereas when you go to God, you have to submit, humble yourself, and you have to deal with another relationship. It's a personal relationship you have to have responsibility for. And so, so that's similar to why we don't want to give up our sin, right? Same reason many times. We don't want to have to give up our way of life. We recognize the truth, we recognize Christ, but then we don't change because these things still serve our egotism, and it's kind of like a safety net of egotism. Like we have to risk relationship.
Yeah, and we have to ask ourselves, do we love Christ more than ourselves? Do we really love Christ more than ourselves? And we have to be honest with ourselves about it. Right. And confront ourselves with that question, because that's what it boils down to.
So getting back to the occult and the magic and the rise of the, believing UFOs and all the rest, why people are susceptible to all of these delusions, because they're not able to let go and to trust. And that's the heart of embracing delusions at the end of the day. I mean, the freedom from delusion is to submit to Christ and to trust Christ, whatever flavor of delusion. I'm trying to help the listener to kind of identify both the temptation, but also the path out, the path away. And if it's
Yeah, because I think overall it's a failure to recognize genuine spirituality, right? And the path out is what we had just talked about, with being able to shape and strengthen true spiritual discernment through reading the lives of the saints, through being obedient to the Father, and just living the life in the church. These things just come up. There's so many times, and I'm sure you've experienced it so many times too, especially as a priest and doing daily services and being immersed in the calendar, that things pop up that are from the lives of the saints that are so incredibly relatable to what we're experiencing today. And it's such a solution for even our modern problems, that and they're tried and tested over time by saints that have come after these saints. You can read something of the life of Saint Anthony the Great, and it's so incredibly palpable and something that we're experiencing today, and it's been tested and tried by all these wonderful illumined fathers and mothers through time, that they really become these guardians for us. And that's why it's so important to not just love our modern saints, but to really sit at their feet and understand the path that they're leading us on. Father Seraphim is so incredibly important to us as Americans, because he's not just talking about, as with some other modern saints, where they do not just talk about false spirituality and how to guard oneself against it and things like that, because they read books and they kind of knew some things from other people. They really experienced it. Father Seraph went through it. He really experienced what false spirituality was all about and the darkness that brought in his life. So
why he was able to so quickly make progress. I mean, if you think about his life, he was basically in the church less than 20 years.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
62 or something, and he reposed in 81.
82 actually, for 20 years.
82. Sorry, 82. So basically 20 years in the church, and he made such rapid progress. I was thinking as you were talking about how he was a pathfinder to the veneration of Saint Paisius Velitskovsky, who we celebrate today on the new calendar, anyway. And how he celebrates and points us to Saint Paisius as a real key over the last couple hundred years in terms of the tradition and the spiritual life of the church. How did he understand that? That kind of this perception and discernment that he had, where there's many people talking about many issues, many topics today, and they don't get right to the core. And I think part of it, of course, is his spiritual struggle. That's first and foremost, but it's also because God allowed him to go through so many things. Discernment, it's interesting. Discernment is a virtue, according to Saint Joseph the Ethicist, that has to be experienced. It cannot be given to someone. It has to be also, let's say, lived and experienced and earned. That's why they choose white-haired older men to be elders and bishops and all the rest. There's a reason why you have to live. You have to suffer. You have to experience to grow and acquire a lot of discernment. Now, some people might have a head start, but generally that's the case. So experiencing, that which is counter to God in the realm of this occult and the UFO, immediately you understand, you can contrast and understand the differences, and you can therefore guide people away from the pitfall. So that's one of the reasons why he became such an important voice, all over the organized world.
Absolutely.
So he can guide us out of these delusions. So what's the big picture? What's the end goal? What's the end game? Is it all leading and born out of this nihilistic age within, and they're going to fill up the emptiness with something, and that something is going to be ultimately the one who puts himself in the place of Christ? Is this where a lot of these movements lead people? Preparing them for the end game?
Yeah, because because as we had talked about, it's a obsession with these outward signs and miracles and appearances and feelings and the gratification of the senses, rather over a genuine spiritual experience. And like the UFO stuff itself, it's just a new occult experience. It's nothing different than that. And especially in that category, there's kind of this idea that these beings are superior and advanced and evolved. And Father Seraphim talks about how, what if they came and they presented a savior, to bring world peace, and we've given this technology to this person, and et cetera, right? It sets the world up for accepting a figure that has this new knowledge bestowed upon him. And so many modern philosophers, from Nietzsche and those before him and on, are all talking about this entering into a new age of man, right? The evolved man, the Superman, right? And breaking the shackles of tradition before us and entering into this new age. And the Father Seraphim sees that these UFO things fit right in line with wanting an advancement, some evolution of mankind, some ushering into a new age. And St. Ignatius Branchunov and St. Simeon the New Theologian talk about to not look up into the heavens for signs, right? Mm-hmm. Because fire will come from the heavens, and the deceptions will come from the heavens, because St. Ignatius talks about how it's the place where Satan reigns the most is in the air, right? And so mm-hmm. all these things just fit in with each other, because now, especially if one is involved in UFO experiences, it's gazing up into the stars in the heavens where these supposed beings are, and looking for them to come, and that sort of a thing, but the occult experiences are very similar in that there is a want for something else that is not a want for something beyond what is seen, but not ready to give oneself over to a personal God that demands something of them, as we talked about earlier, where there can be this supposed mastery or experience of a spiritual nature, but without anything demanded of them.
Yes. It's the perennial temptation in the garden, right? That's what Christ will again at the end of history.
Absolutely.
He'll promise to provide man that which God wants to provide in a personal relationship, without ties and the sacrifices that go into a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. So theosis, God without being without God. God, God by grace with Christ, but an autonomous, egotistical, and within the world, utopia is what these will give. So if all things are actually cultivating in us that self-centeredness and egotism and desire for experiences, or a kind of drug on a religious/spiritual drug, well, it's all still very much conducive to prepare us to accept the perennial lie, and to be obedient to the father of lies, and submit ourselves to the Antichrist ultimately. Nothing really that undermines that. I think people that have been conditioned to think of it, just always about it's like self-help, but in the spiritual realm. Yeah, it's all about me.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting about it, and this is maybe for the non-believer or the person who kind of thinks that maybe all this stuff is the same, right? And things like that, and like Christianity is the same as this tarot reading, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
Is that this movement of mankind to evolve, to become something more than he is right now, and et cetera, even on popularity and in the world is done without Christ, and wanting to become this God without God, as you said, Father. But it at least exposes that man is meant for something more than to just live a materialistic, self-pleasing life, right? Because whenever there is this emphasis on materialism, science, rationality, physical world, there's always a spiritual vacuum, and people want something more. And unfortunately, in the last decade, especially, there's the fall into occult stuff, things like that, as we talked about. But it at least exposes that there's a want that man has to go beyond just the materialistic physical world, that he's meant for something more, but we just have to find the right path to get there, to do it, right? And it's through Christ.
I have to wonder if in the grand scheme of things, in the machinations of the enemy, that he doesn't. I mean, he did this clearly in the West. He went from one extreme to another in order to destroy the royal path. And here he's going from a gross materialism to a gross spiritualism. And he's saying that, okay, you who are filled with, consumerism, and you're not fulfilled at all. Here, I'm going to give you now what you're lacking, which is a relationship with the spiritual realm, as if that in and of itself going to save or redeem or
Right.
purify or illumine. And so man is, you see that everywhere on all kinds of levels. You see that people are running down one path and they realize, well, this path is not the Catholic whole, right? This is just not the fulfillment. So, okay, now what? Okay, I gotta create the opposite of this to solve that. And it just goes back and forth endlessly. 30,000 Protestant denominations, and how many people come to Orthodox and they say, well, I've been through everything. I literally went through I was a Hindu, and then I was and now I realize, so they cannot find that not the fullness in the sense of quantity, because I think fullness is quantity. Fullness is only Christ, right? Mm-hmm. Everything else is not fullness. It's pieces. That's so again, just to get back to the question of how to get, if there's people listening who are in occultism, or people who have children who are dabbling in occultism, because that's probably happening a lot, or if you have people who are just confused on why the narrow path, the royal path, the only path is through Christ and in the church, there's no whole totality of the fullness of man being healed without the communion with the living God, the personal God. And that means submission, and that means crucifixion. All of these things aren't, you can't get them piecemeal. The devil's offering all kinds of experiences, just piecemeal stuff it's almost like distraction, and just distract them until it's too late for them to wake up from their.
And you can't heal yourself. That's what it boils down to too. That's why people go through all of these spiritual roads, and then end up at the church and realize they can't heal themselves. These impersonal deities, or this impersonal philosophy or whatever, is just self-gratification. You can't heal oneself. A surgeon can't do his own heart surgery, and a brain surgeon can't do his own brain surgery.
And man cannot be healed but by the God man. It has to be incarnate, God incarnate.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
It's fascinating. In the book of Revelation that we're going through, we see at the core of the great, the aim of the enemy and the great temptation of mankind at the end of history is the denial of the theanthropic nature of Jesus Christ and his body, the church. That is the core. That's what he's sought after again and again and again, from the Arianism to Nestorianism to iconoclasm to all the isms throughout the history of the world. It's all ultimately about that Christ is not God and man, but he's just a man. So you just said you cannot heal yourself, and all the religions of the world essentially are not the incarnation, right? So they're all ultimately impossible. They cannot heal man. It's all within the world trying to solve it. Like you said, a brain surgeon trying to do brain surgery on himself. It's not going to happen. You've got to submit. So that's another aspect to why should I abandon my New Age practices, or my going down to the local palm reader, all the rest. None of that is salvation. None of that's healing. None of that's redemption. It's all distraction at the very best. Yeah.
Yeah. But it also gives a false power, because inevitably these spirits that, help or are kind of doing the bidding of the person practicing, they're not just these benevolent beings that follow after somebody's command or are trapped in a realm or something. There will always be something required back from these spirits, it is never just an innocent one-way street.
Hmm. So you're in Lombok. Did I say it right?
Lombok, yeah. You
so
said
that's what, like 2 hours north of LA?
Yeah. 3 hours, about 3 hours north of LA.
Like right in the center of California.
Yeah, like California does that curve. It comes in where that curve is, that little point is called Point Conception, and we're the first town that's north of that. So right,
and that's St. Timothy's Orthodox Church there.
Yes.
And you've been there for quite some time?
I think I'm coming up on 6 years.
6 years.
Yeah.
And you're dealing mostly with I mean, the people there are mostly agrarian. They're working in the on the land, or what's going on there in Central California?
Well, it is kind of a farming town, but most of the people that live in town are blue collar workers. For the most part. And then we have some natives. Shumash is the native tribe around here. Just baptized a Shumash lady a few months ago.
Glory to God. And
that's been she took the name Olga after Olga.
How about that?
We did it preemptively, and then all of a sudden, but that's been an incredible culture to kind of get into. And what's been very beautiful about it in many ways is that there's no hurdles as far as acceptance of the church's teachings and the lives of the saints. With many converts from the West, we encounter a little bit of a skepticism over miracles, or did this happen or that happen?
Because they're rationalists. They're rationalists.
These natives are so incredibly tied to the acknowledgement of the spiritual realm that when the lives of the saints are talked about and told to them, it's just 100% accepted. Like there's no doubt that these things happened, and that's been really incredible, but at the same time, a lot of demonic ties, through the history of generations of practicing shamanism and things like that. There's demons tied to bloodlines for sure, and
that's fascinating. The thing you just said struck me, reminded me of something when I was in Athos, and an elder was telling me that places are sanctified, and there's places that are not sanctified. In other words, they have been there's been demonic events in the past in these places, and there's the difference. In fact, it affects people today. Yeah.
I was talking to this Shumash native who he dove into the shamanism aspect of the culture, even revived some old pagan practices, and but later found orthodoxy. And he was telling me some of these, the stories that have been passed down through his family about this local area specifically, and how it's really incredible. The power that these shamans got would come from these water beasts or these water spirits or dragons. They would go on these fasting and hike to a certain lake where this dragon would come out of the lake, and they would pat the dragon 3 times, and then they're subject to this dragon, but the dragon gave them powers.
Wow. It's the same story repeated again and again.
Yeah. And he said that they believe that these dragons also lived in like underwater currents, so they can come up in lakes, but also come up in the ocean and things like that. And there are still tribes who worship these dragons and draw their power from them that are in New Mexico and other places and things like that. And it's a whole it's a whole other occult thing, right? A whole shamanistic thing that still exists. And there's a fascination in our modern culture of like the peace-loving natives and these kinds of things, which this Chumash man, totally kind of obliterates because of some of the false histories that have been presented about his tribe and other tribes. But yeah,
so he became Orthodox.
He became Orthodox. Yeah, and he took the name of Saint Peter the Aleut, and he found out later through some history that he's actually related to the Spaniard that took an axe to Saint Peter.
What? Oh my goodness!
It's an incredible story. He has to tell it, but it's an incredible story. It shows that the saints pray for their persecutors, because generations later, this man found Saint Peter, and then after he took him as a patron, found out about this whole incident.
That's fascinating. And so this points really to how much the church needs to sanctify the place, sanctify Absolutely. The land, sanctify the, blessing of water, going with icons, taking relics, all these things that we didn't do during COVID, but we've been doing for 2,000 years. You can see how, that's going to sanctify the area and drive the demons further away from the surrounding area, from the church. That's what the church should be doing in the surrounding area, right?
And he said that there's stories from his tribe about the Aleutians who came down with the Russians, and the Chumash here helped them hunt fur pelts for the Russians. And at a certain point, at first when they encountered these Aleutian people, they were very warlike and they're fierce, and these people down here, the natives, were scared of them. But after a time, he thinks it's probably because of the baptism and their life in the church that they became subdued, really gentle and loving people, and that the Spaniards in this area used to drive them off because they actually came here to evangelize. They would land and they would mingle with these tribes, and they would start to evangelize the tribes, become Orthodox, but they had already been seized by these missions, and so the Spaniard priests and missionaries would drive off the Aleutians specifically because they were their ties with the Russians, and that happened a lot in this area. So it's a very interesting area, pre-modernization.
Is that possibly behind the martyrdom of St. Peter the Aleut, that they had already had animosity toward the Aleutians?
What this man talks about, I guess there's new history that has been translated. I have a copy of it. I can send it to you, but it was translated from the Russian. And what it actually shows is that St. Peter wasn't martyred in San Francisco, but that he was martyred in North Los Angeles. And there's a parallel story with the local tribe here that the Aleutians were on Chumash canoes, and they were going towards the Channel Islands. We're just off our coast to do pelt hunting, and they were blown off course by a storm and landed in the north of Los Angeles. But the only person from this historical account, or the only people that were persecuted were the Aleutian people, so there's a suspicion of why exactly was St. Peter and the Aleutians targeted amongst other natives in this manner, and it's most likely because they knew of their ties with the Russians and why they wanted St. Peter to convert to Roman Catholicism, because this would show the other natives of the area that Roman Catholicism was the thing to do, and the supposed true church and things like this, So it's really fascinating.
It is fascinating. That should be a podcast or a book or something.
Because it should. But it's incredible how it shows all of these the shamanistic stuff that was existing before here was already starting to be chiseled away and rooted out by the Aleutians who are coming down here and trying to expose orthodoxy to them.
This is the perennial story. Like you can hear this story repeated all over the world for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
That you started with the demons and the locals giving them rights, and then being dominated by the demons through these apparitions. Then you see the Orthodox portion of the locals become Orthodox. They're persecuted by the heretics, and it's just like this is the perennial story of the church. Amazing. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Father, and hopefully this has been a good opportunity for the faithful to dive a little deeper and get to know you, get to know your work. If they're in the town, you're in Lambach, to drop in St. Timothy's, but also to look you up and spend some time with Death to the World, the zine. And you've got a lot of other things going on besides just the periodical. Are you publishing a collection in one volume, I think, or has that already been done?
I'm still working on that and getting. Okay. We're going to put all of basically all the 90s issues, along with articles and interviews from the people who are involved in the 90s, into one book, and then we'll release. After we do that, maybe a year or two later, we'll release a volume when Father Turbo, I, and a bunch of other people got a blessing to take it over, and we'll kind of do that section of the ministry's history.
So is it still coming out does it come out on a monthly or bi-month? How often is it out?
The periodical is basically like once a year because of the time constraints that I have. But okay. I'm probably going to do start doing a half issue before Lent. That is really just dedicated to the spiritual life. So something on confession or something on spiritual warfare or something like this, that will be a half issue. So hopefully before Lent that will come out. Yeah.
And you got an online store. If you got shirts and things that sell. Yeah,
there's shirts. The magazines are predominantly on there and things like that. I run it out of my house.
The back issues you have.
Yeah, I run it out of my house. Presbyteria does a lot of the shipping and things like that, but we're like always out of stock on stuff. Every time I put something up, it just sells. But
it's good.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. A good problem to have. But we have a Patreon with some things on there, and people have access to all the old issues on there, printable issues on there. They can get heads up before everybody else on shirts and things like that get restocked. And so yeah, if you just look at the website, you can find a lot of different avenues.
So it's patreon.com/Death to the World, or what do you got? What's your
Death to the World or Death to the World zine? But if you go to just deathtotheworld.com on the other menu, you can find the Patreon link right there.
All right. Just to reiterate, Death to the World means death to the passions, because the world is the collective word for the passions, right? So it's a play on words there. So if anybody missed it, this is we're not against the creation of our Lord. We love it dearly, the human beings and all that He created. Yeah. All right, just a little, but we'll look forward to seeing you again on Orthodox Ethos in the future. We appreciate your struggle, and keep us in your prayers. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Wonderful to be with you.
Amen. Thanks so much.